Today I'm going to focus on one of the most important amendments in the Bill of Rights, and that is the Second Amendment, commonly known as the Bear Arms Amendment. The amendment states that a well regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This was ratified and passed on December 15th, 1791, by three-fourths of the states. And this continues to be an amendment and a right that provides a great deal of controversy, especially in America. Over the last few years, gun violence has increased, and this amendment is used by a lot of people, a lot of groups like the NRA, to justify the usage and the ownership of weapons in America. And as I said before, it becomes a place of issues. If you're looking at the election right now, or looking at the presidential candidates, gun control has become one of the major issues. As there have been so many incidents with gun violence over the last few years, that has become a major issue that we as a country have to address. If you look at this chart here, it shows that we have over 270 million and growing guns in the United States, and that there are 89 guns per 100 people in this country. When looking at the Second Amendment, the ideological origins of the Second Amendment by Robert Shalhoub provides us with viewpoints and precepts as to how this amendment came about and its addition to the Bill of Rights. It provides several meaningful mindsets and viewpoints, and one of which that sticks out the most is the idea that it is democratic that people have the ability to own guns, and that it is their right, as in the Republican style of government, to own weapons, and to use them for their own protection. While many may not agree with this, this is a concept that fuels the Second Amendment becoming the amendment that allows people to own their own weapons. So I'm going to focus on a couple of landmark court cases involving the Supreme Court that directly tie to the Second Amendment. And what you'll notice is that in the beginning, the Second Amendment was more or less in support of just the federal government, and that it gave states themselves the ability to maintain and control gun regulations. The first one occurred in 1876, and it's the United States versus Cruikshank. And there was a group of white militia members that attacked a group of African Americans in Louisiana, and so the state prosecuted them, and it made its way up to the Supreme Court. And when discussing the Supreme Court pretty much ruled against any individual right to bear arms, and that the amendment only guaranteed states' rights to maintain militias. It also said that state governments could regulate guns in whichever way they wanted to. 10 years later, Presser versus Illinois, it stemmed from a guy named Herman Presser, and he actually owned and trained his own militia force. He was arrested, and he took the Supreme Court, stating that the government had infringed upon his Second Amendment rights. The Supreme Court stated that the amendment only restricted federal government, and that the state government could regulate private militia, and that Presser had no right to have its own army. In 1894, Miller versus Texas again reinforced that states could regulate gun laws without it being infringing on the Second Amendment. Robertson versus Baldwin in 1897, the court stated that laws for concealed arms do not infringe on people's Second Amendment rights, and thus you could be arrested for having a concealed arm because you have a weapon, depending upon what the state says. These four court cases listed here pretty much move towards individuals having the ability to own their own weapons. The United States versus Miller in 1939 supported the National Firearms Act and ruled that individual gun rights had to be connected to citizens' common obligation to serve in militias. It pretty much stated that if a militia was called, a person has the ability to get their own weapon and join in. Thus, they have a right to their own weapons. But it opened the door for individualistic interpretation concerning bearing arms, but it provided no protection whatsoever for guns that were not used for militia service. Fast forward a few years, District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008. This ruling by the Supreme Court is mentioned by Nicole Price in DC versus Heller, Firing the Blanks. And it pretty much stated that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual's right to possess a firearm unconnected to service in a militia. It can be used only for lawful purposes. So now a person could own their own weapons, even if they were not involved in militia service. McDonald versus the city of Chicago in 2010, it stated that because of the 14th Amendment, people have the right to keep and bear arms for the protection of their personal property and self-defense. And finally, to kind of reaffirm that, the People versus Aguilar in 2013, also in Illinois, summed up the decisions of McDonald versus the city of Chicago. And it pretty much said that if you use a weapon in any unlawful or aggravated way, that in itself is a violation of the right to keep and bear arms. So the Second Amendment started off as something being pushed upon the states, to more recently becoming a bill or a right that pretty much said that anyone, as long as they're protecting their home or self-defense, have the ability to have and use their own arms. This is an amendment, as I said before, that continues to cause controversy and is one that many people have, split many different ways concerning. It is a major and a great amendment that, if you would like to learn more about, I suggest you research, look at my bibliography, and it'll provide you with other sources concerning these court cases. Thank you and be blessed.